Welcome to This Explainer, how spiritual authority was used against Africa. So today we're jumping straight into the historical paper trail to uncover exactly how sacred texts and, well, everyday liturgy were methodically weaponized. The goal? To facilitate colonization and establish deep social control across the continent. We'll be looking at academic journals, historical archives, and expert testimonies that all point to a highly coordinated effort. They wanted to completely replace indigenous worldviews with systems of total, unquestioning submission. It's a heavy, deeply complex history, but absolutely crucial to understand. So let's dive right in.
Section 1. The Scramble for African Souls.
Okay, to really understand how this started, we have to rewind to the late 19th century, right around the time of the infamous Scramble for Africa. And trust me, the timing here was absolutely no coincidence. Just listen to the premise of this chilling historical directive sent to early missionaries in the Congo. It literally outlines the true, unvarnished goal, using religious authority to protect foreign industrial interests, period. It commands missionaries to teach students to read, sure, but explicitly not to reason. It tells them to systematically erase indigenous heroes. The sources even show missionaries were instructed to find texts that encouraged followers to, quote, love poverty. Why? Well, so they wouldn't start eyeing the massive underground wealth of their own lands.
Now, to enforce this submission, colonial powers leaned heavily, and I mean heavily, on very specific biblical texts. Romans 13 was a clear favorite, specifically the verse telling every person to be subject to the governing authorities. Colonial administrators actively weaponized this interpretation, basically demanding that colonized populations offer absolute obedience to their new European masters. So resisting the colonial government wasn't just a legal crime anymore. It was framed as a direct, literal sin against divine authority. Talk about a psychological trap.
And here's where the narrative really gets twisted. The colonizers deliberately took these intricate, beautifully balanced indigenous systems and slapped the label of witchcraft or primitive on them. They pushed this idea that Africans revered some lazy, absent god. But scholars and actual practitioners tell a totally different story. African spirituality was deeply focused on communal healing, maintaining a really strict balance with nature, and, get this, active scientific problem-solving. But of course, that false primitive narrative was the perfect cover story. They needed it to convince the world and eventually Africans themselves that they desperately required European civilization.
Moving on to Section 2. Erasing indigenous beliefs.
Let's be totally clear here. This systemic erasure, it was not just passively accepted. In fact, indigenous beliefs became a massive engine for political resistance. Take Mikatili Wamenza, for example. She was this absolutely legendary Giriama prophetess in Kenya. Back in 1913, she drew directly on her indigenous spiritual mandate to successfully rally her entire people against British forced conscription. It's an incredible story. Here is a widow in a strongly patriarchal society completely defying the standard white savior narrative, using her spiritual authority to unite her community and actively fight off colonial domination.
Her immense authority was actually rooted in the Kaya. These were sacred shrines that basically served as the epicenter of Giriama beliefs, rituals, and moral codes. Naturally, the colonial administrators completely misunderstood what these sacred spaces were. One British administrator actually had the nerve to call a highly sacred kaya a dilapidated refuse heap and literally tried to forcibly relocate it just to physically control the population. The elders, drawing pure strength from their faith, flatly refused.
So, how did the authorities respond to this kind of fierce spiritual defiance? Well, whenever indigenous spirituality successfully fueled resistance, the colonial powers busted out their absolute favorite weapon. They criminalized the leaders by branding them as witches. They weaponized the term witchcraft specifically to demonize and legally prosecute any political opposition to their rule. It was a neat little legal loophole to get rid of anyone who stood in their way.
Which brings us to Section 3, Liturgy as Cultural Control.
Jumping forward into the mid-20th century, especially in South Africa during apartheid, this erasure evolved into something incredibly systematic. We're talking about a psychological tool scholars call liturgical colonization. European church liturgy was intentionally, methodically crafted to demolish African consciousness across a bunch of different domains. The church strictly forbade using local languages in prayer, mandating English or Afrikaans instead. They pathologized traditional medicine, basically telling congregants that seeking a traditional healer was demonic. They banned African musical rhythms outright, and they actively replaced complex African gender systems, where women often held really distinct spiritual authority, with this rigid, imported European patriarchy.
And maybe one of the most devastating impacts of all this was how it desacralized the African landscape itself. The indigenous worldview always held that the land, the mountains, the rivers, was a deeply hallowed space connected to the ancestors. But the new colonial liturgy declared those natural spaces heathen. They said only European-style brick-and-mortar church buildings were valid holy sites. Researchers point out exactly why they did this. By severing the community's spiritual connection to the land and reframing it as just a material commodity, colonial land grabbing became psychologically a whole lot easier to execute.
All right, Section 4, the political masking tape.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting. When classical colonialism formally ended, this weaponization of spiritual authority didn't just vanish. Nope, it was simply hijacked by post-colonial political elites. Scholars actually refer to the public use of the Bible in many modern African states as a masking tape. It's a strategic deployment of religion to cover up systemic injustices, massive corruption, and a total lack of democratic accountability. Basically, when leaders lack a genuine mandate from the voters, they just pivot and claim a mandate from God.
Modern dictators across the continent have quite literally wrapped themselves in biblical rhetoric to stay in power. Take Zambia. Frederick Chiluba suddenly declared the country a Christian nation, primarily to court goodwill while he was facing severe corruption probes. In Liberia, you had warlord Charles Taylor acting as a lay preacher and, unbelievably, even comparing himself to Jesus Christ amidst all those atrocities. And over in Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe's camp actively cultivated this public myth of him as the divinely chosen Moses of Africa. These myths do a very specific job. They tell voters that a leader's power comes directly from God, which renders democratic elections little more than a rubber stamp.
Finally, Section 5, reclaiming spiritual identity.
Ultimately, though, this is a story of incredible resilience. Because today, there's this fierce Pan-African movement actively working to reclaim indigenous identity, and they are doing it through three main avenues. First up, theologians are diving into African biblical hermeneutics, which is basically stripping away those old colonial interpretations to find truly liberative meanings in sacred texts. Second, through liturgical syncretism, congregations are proudly reintegrating their mother tongues, their traditional musical rhythms, and their own cosmologies right back into daily worship. And third, practitioners are embracing embodiment practices. They're successfully merging modern clinical psychological diagnoses with ancient ancestral traditions to treat mental health in a way that is deeply culturally grounded.
As scholars and modern practitioners are quick to point out, true African spirituality is not some prescriptive straitjacket of passive faith. As one practitioner beautifully put it, we did not pray for rain, we fetched rain. It's a deeply creative, dynamic system of balance that actively merges science, nature, and ancestral intellect to solve real-world problems. It relies on the fundamental knowledge that humanity is an active part of nature, not completely separate from it.
Which brings us to a crucial final thought I want to leave you with today. We've seen how systems of spiritual authority have been meticulously designed to control, to erase, and to enforce submission over generations. So as you look at the systems governing your own life right now, ask yourself, are your core beliefs truly your own authentic choices, or are they the lingering, inherited legacy of those who once sought to control you? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and always keep questioning the history behind what you're told to believe.